Hello and welcome to Reclaiming the Narrative, White and Hispanic Women Enslavers in San Antonio, Texas. Before I begin with the rest of the film, I'd like to first dedicate this film to the countless Black people who were forced into slavery. While this film touches on their enslavers, it must be understood that this is the story of Black enslaved people first and foremost. The collection of photographs that we see now is a collection done by KSAT at Trinity University that shows us pictures of Black former enslaved people who actually lived here in San Antonio, Texas. This is their story, and we must always remember their part of history as well. The next picture we see is a picture of the historical landmark here in San Antonio, Texas, of Caso Navarro, home to the also famous Navarro family. Today we are going to be specifically talking about Concepcion or Navarro, the matriarch of the Navarro family. 2 months before slavery was abolished in Texas, Concepcion or Navarro sold Adeline, a 30-year-old yellow girl enslaved person, and her two daughters, Maria Luisa and Emily, to Benito Lopez and deemed them as a slave people for life. This is the original bill of sale that shows this selling of Adeline and her children to Benito Lopez. In order for us to properly read the bill of sale and properly understand it, we are going to be using Edgar Johnson's book, African Americans in the Bexar County, Texas Deed Records. The next picture is of the actual bill of sale, better translated for better use. And we can see here how Concepcion or Navarro sold Adeline and her children to Benito Lopez. In this bill of sale, it becomes apparent how enslavers weren't only just white men, like history usually says. Women, even Hispanic women, had the agency to enslave and sell enslaved people, or in this case, other women of color, just as any white male enslaver did. This is what this film seeks to highlight. Women, although still a limited population in the grand scheme of enslavers, were nonetheless perpetrators of the institution of slavery. In this next photograph, we see an assessment of property situated in the county for Bexar County. Specifically, we're going to be looking at Elizabeth Cotton, whose name lies at the very bottom of this picture. Elizabeth Cotton was part of a famous Cotton family and a famous enslaver family in Bexar County. Now, the Cotton women were not just merely a bystander to their husband or father's enslavement practices. They were active participants. The Cotton women are just one example of how white women were also involved in the institution of slavery. Of course, there's still the question of how involved were the women. As we can see, we can take a closer look about Elizabeth Cotton's involvement in the institution of slavery. And you can see here, from what we saw in the previous photo showing the full document, we can see here that it says that Elizabeth Cotton owns 4 enslaved people, showing her involvement in the institution of slavery. In this next bill of sale, it is supposed to be representing the sale of one enslaved person between Margaret Rice, Louisiana Cotton, and Andrew Cotton. The transcription from Edgar Johnson's book shows the bill of sale a little bit closer and a little bit more information. Now, this raises a question of how were the Cotton women involved in the institution of slavery? Were they simply selling and trading the enslaved people for their husbands? Was it merely a plot for their husbands/fathers to escape certain property tax practices? Regardless, the Cotton women had their names still attached to the bills of sale. They were there. They participated in the trading of enslaved people. That is noteworthy enough. It is noteworthy enough to show that there were still white female enslavers helping enslave other women and other men. But once again, female enslavers did not stop at white women. Just as Hispanic men enslaved, so did their female counterparts. In this next bill of sale, we see once again the mention of Concepcion or Navarro. However, this time she is mentioned as Concepcion or Callahan in her first marriage, and this is to show how she is a notable Hispanic female enslaver. Going back once again to Edgar Johnson's transcription of the bill of sale, we see here that Concepcion or Callahan this time helped sell the enslaved person Rosa Josefina to Francis Gilbert. So this once again shows that female enslavers did not stop at just white women. Just as Hispanic men enslaved, so did their female counterparts. Concepcion R. Navarro, known as Concepcion Callahan in her first marriage, had two different accounts in the respective years of 1860 and 1865. This shows how Concepcion, in both of her marriages, was a participant in enslavement in both selling and buying enslaved peoples. This next bill of sale is a bill of sale between now two women, and it is of one woman, Maria Antonia Cortinas, the female enslaver in this point, selling her enslaved person to Sarah McLeod, or in this case, Sarah Cortina, as it says in this specific bill of sale. However, in Edgar Johnson's final transcription of the bill of sale, the name reads Sarah McLeod, which we can assume is just a change of marriage or a change of property in some shape or form. So in the case of Maria Antonia Cortinas, what makes her sale so special is that she sold her enslaved person to another woman. There is no mention of a man, whether white or Hispanic, in the exchange. The exchange between Cortinas and McLeod is entirely female, which is of course at the expense of a female enslaved person, Jane, being sold for $475. This exchange raises the question of whether all women enslavers were simply playing the part male enslavers told them to. Was that the case for Cortinas, or did Cortinas have her own new form of agency of selling an enslaved person to another woman? At that point, can Cortinas really be seen as a bystander to the institution of slavery rather than a perpetrator? All that being said, slavery will forever be a stain in Texas's history. This film was created with the intention to show how black men and women were enslaved from all sorts of people. White women and Hispanic women made a small percentage of enslavers, but they were still enslavers. It is important to acknowledge this history so that when intersectional or intercultural dialogues occur, especially in those of the feminist realm, all participants know their history and what they must do to change it. As we come to a close with this film, I, the filmmaker Savannah Torres, would like to thank Dr. Teresa Van Hoy for all of her help in making this film come to fruition. Finally, this is where our film comes to a close, and these are the sources that we used for said film. Thank you.